I'm Keith Murray with Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Irving Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce. I guess I can say the whole thing since we have a bunch of different chambers here on that. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this breakout session that will provide you with reminders on practices and legal implications you need to remember once you have employees. See, several of you do, and a couple do not. So, first, some housekeeping chores. You'll find at your seats an evaluation form. It's probably underneath the other material because I put it out there first. We would ask you to complete that. You can either leave it in your seat or hand it to me at the door as you leave. It'll help us evaluate and develop our programs for next year. As you know, this is our second annual, and we're continually trying to improve it. We want this to be a learning experience and want to address your questions. The speakers will take the questions as they go through the presentation. We ask that you limit your question to exclude any long commentary on that because we do want to get everything in and be respectful of everybody's time on that. This particular breakout session was created by our Workforce Enrichment Council of the Chamber. Our first panelist, David Schmidt, is the co-chair of that committee. And Don Williams, who is working with the other program, is the staff liaison for that committee. David serves as the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for HMS Holdings Corporation, is responsible for setting the overall strategic human resources and people development direction for his company. He has more than 17 years of broad experience with senior human resource executive positions. Joining him today also, our second panelist is Christy Jump, hiding behind me over here. Christy is an attorney with Aiken Gump. Her practice focuses primarily on employment litigation. She has counseled and defended employers on related matters to discrimination and harassment issues, and also advises businesses on policies, training, discipline, termination, reductions in force, internal investigations, and compliance issues. So if you've got a problem, she's been down that road. It's kind of like Mr. Yancey was saying, that if you're down in the hole, she'll jump in and help you get out of it. She's also written and presented multiple times on social networking in the workplace. So please join me in welcoming these two distinguished panelists to the presentation.
All right.
Some of you in the back may not have all the handouts. We do have them in the front pews, just kind of like church. So come on up.
That's right. So in case you didn't get one, there are ones set around. I just wanted to real quick talk about it. One is the presentation. You can take notes on it, not take notes on it if you'd like. Then there's a couple other just handouts that we wanted to make sure you had to take away. Sometimes in this short period of time, we'll talk about some things that are just very common sense. And you'll think, gee, what did I get out of that other than conversation? So we wanted to make sure that you had some details, some things you could go back and reference. It'll give you access to other areas that you might want to investigate because we won't be able to hit it all, obviously, today. So in there's a heavy section in the handouts on independent contractors and what constitutes an employee or not. That's real big in today's environment within the government. And one thing you'll see as a theme throughout is states need money to pay for what's happening. Where are they going to get it? They're going to look for all the things that they've been ignoring that we're going to talk about today. So for no other reason, you want to listen to this, it's to try and identify areas that you don't make up for the other budget deficits within state and federal governments. So we'll talk about some of those things and go from there. Okay, so why would you attend this session, right? Any HR mistakes for any company, whether they're large or small, obviously could be disruptive. They just create havoc in the workplace. There's disparity, there's uncertainty. But for small businesses, it can be amplified. It can be very destructive. In fact, it could affect the potential survival of your small company. So what we're going to talk about today is what, in fact, is human resources. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's common sense. I'm an engineer. In fact, I'm a geology major. Okay. Then I was in electronics in the Navy for 8 more years. Then I got into plant management. I was a plant manager and a regional ops manager for another 8 years, at which point somebody called one day and said, hey, we're reorganizing HR. Will you come do that? That was in San Antonio, Texas. I said, HR? But they're the people that yell at me all the time. Oh, okay, what the heck? Back to San Antonio. I get to go. I was in Pittsburgh, although I loved it. We came back to Texas. And I said, do I get any money for doing this? And showed up, and I told the staff, I said, okay, guys, you've been telling me no for the last 8 years. It's time to change. Let's look at our policies and what makes sense for the operational manager. So it's all these policies, practices, guidelines, laws, etc. And those are all the processes that you'll worry about. But it's all tempered by what you guys know in your gut and inherently how to treat people. That's what it all comes down to. Because all these laws were generated because people didn't do their job as leaders. And I look at my, we talk about HR value, and my counterparts always talk about adding value, but I think of that, they're trying to save their job. I try to work myself out of my job because I want you as leaders to know exactly what you need to know. Unfortunately, statistically, the courts look to say, oh, did you talk to the HR person? Even though you have the right answer, they still ask, did you talk to the HR person? So to me, there's a little job security in that, but I do work to eliminate my job so that managers don't really need me. So as we talk through these things, that's the approach that we'll probably take. So we're going to start out with number one at the top 5 mistakes. And a lot of this is attributed to other groups that have done exactly what y'all are doing today in small business groups around the nation. And so my research was into those certain presentations. This was a very common role. Not defining the roles for the partners in the business or the individual owners when it comes to a succession plan should something happen. And I'm going to let Christy talk about this because she has a lot of experience in this. One, owning her own business, and then also just the experiences that she's had in her role in helping people get through these issues.
Thank you. Well, David said that his job or his goal was to try to make it so that he can work himself out of a job. And unfortunately, plaintiffs' attorneys don't let me do that. So my job is to hopefully make it so that you're just in the best position possible when a problem does come up, and to narrow down the number that do, but make it basically so that you can answer effectively and more quickly without having to answer quite as many questions and have things pretty much all on the line. And like David said, I have been a small business owner. I had for a few years a solo practice. I'm now back with a larger firm. I'm with Aiken Gump. But I do understand a lot of the difficulties. I've joked that when I was a solo practitioner and had my own business, because I do employment law, I did not have employees. I understand that's not feasible for everyone. I had a few contractors, and we'll get to that. But I understand all the difficulties there and the different issues. And one of the things that's most important is to make sure, as we indicated, that you clearly define the different roles. If you have an owner, then you want to make clear who is the owner. And that looks like it would be obvious on paperwork, but there is litigation that comes up where you will see things that I end up hitting court cases where they say, yeah, but effectively, this person may have been the owner, but this is the one who actually was the decision maker for everything. This is the person who had all of the real authority. And with larger companies, you get into like a piercing the corporate veil kind of issue. Smaller companies, it's just who really had the right to say hired or fired. Who really had the right to say promoted or not, who gave the raises, who made the determination on those. So those are the sorts of things that you want to keep as clearly defined as you can. Obviously, you might need to have a backup, if someone who can do, who can fill in a particular role. If the main person who does that is out of pocket, traveling, something like that. But for the most part, those roles should be pretty clearly defined. Also, as far as who the partners are. You want to know who's going to be actually sharing in the money, directly, the money of the business, who's entitled to that, who gets that. And you would think that, in the same way that you hear, I guess the old adage that sometimes the shoemaker's children go barefoot, lawyers are horrible at doing this sort of thing with law firms. Law firms are sometimes not really well defined. And there have been a lot of lawsuits of lawyer against lawyer for who's entitled to what payment, who's entitled to what fees. Some of them have hit the Texas Supreme Court. They've been appealed up twice. They not only do they not get resolved before they get to court, they go through a trial, they get appealed up to the Court of Appeals, they get appealed up again to the Texas Supreme Court on whether there was a breach of contract or was there any sort of implied contract, was there any sort of course of business or course of normal dealings that that created some right or some expectation other than what's spelled out. And the answer to that is always hopefully no. Okay, hopefully everything is spelled out, or at least spelled out in broad enough terms that you can work within them and people know that while there may be some flexibility, it's under this category. It's under this heading. And those are the sorts of things you want to keep as clear as you can. Long-term and short-term, what you want to look for on that short-term, obviously you want to know who gets to run the day-to-day business. Who do employees come to with complaints? And while that is often HR, and hopefully, to some degree HR, not every employee is necessarily, versed enough to know to go to HR or comfortable enough to go to HR. David can be intimidating. His title, there are going to be some employees who just say, like, I don't want to get all formal about this. I just want to talk to you. Let me just explain to you why I'm uncomfortable. And you need to make sure that the roles are clear enough that people know, well, if that happens, first of all, that's a red flag. Anyone in any kind of supervisory level needs to know phrases like that mean you go tell HR, at a minimum, and figure out if it's something you need to do more with. But even more, beyond that, kind of the next level up on short term, you want to get into a little more of who can hire, who can fire, make sure that that's clear. Longer term, is there a clear expectation of growth within the business? Is there a clear expectation of who's going to share in what? If you have people who are on commission, that needs to be laid out, versus if you have someone who's expecting to get, a share of the profits, and how's that going to be calculated? And then, again, impact of change. And as we go through this, if anybody has questions, feel free to bring them up as we go. We'll keep going if you don't, because there's a lot of material we want to get through. But if you do, feel free to jump in. Impact of change is something that's very key, and that usually comes up more with executives if there is a change of control agreement. If you have an employment agreement with anyone within the company, hopefully there is a change of control provision. And that change of control provision will explain what triggers it, what is considered a change of control, if there is going to be a payout or not upon the change of control, and what the options are. Maybe it's, we will pay out if you're not offered a comparable position of title, salary, location, other factors, or, you will be paid out in any event, but can also work, and forfeit that, or it'll be put in a trust. There's one company that actually they just created an escrow account for all of the change of control payments that they needed to make, and as long as the employees signed off on that going forward, and in advance, then it was okay. It's highly unusual, and I think it's going to create an accounting mess later. But as long as all the employees are okay with it, that's all right to do. But there really does need to be, if there's a possibility of mergers, or if the company may be up for sale at any point, there really needs to be some sort of plan laid out as to who's going to stay in what role, who are your designated key employees that you want to protect, and if you don't, what's likely to happen after that. And there are a whole bunch of people out there who can talk to you about how benefits need to be anticipated, if not spelled out clearly in that as well.
If I could throw in a couple of examples back on that, whereas Christy's actually had experience in a small company, my experience with small companies has actually been, as she alluded to just then, on the acquiring side. And the company's title, HMS Holdings, implies we are holding multiple companies. And just some examples from recent times. We've gone in a company of 40 employees, fast growing. They actually had a separate IT group. They had a marketing group, and then, of course, the individuals doing the work. As I did our due diligence and we went through that acquisition, discovered that the IT lead had promised all these IT people he had hired a percentage of the business. That was news to the owners. It was not discovered until late in the game, when all of a sudden the IT people were saying, well, what about my percentage of the business? So we're going, excuse me? So those things happen. I have another one where there was a 25% partnership arrangement, went through the acquisition, and now little issues are coming up around, well, I was a 75% owner, and they were only a 25% owner. So again, defining exactly where that fits, I think, is very important, both for your continued work, and then whether you intend on growing, whether you intend on selling. All those things, I think, come into play. And I forgot to ask earlier on, if I could say how many, we're assuming small businesses, so just to make sure, is there anyone